Hey everyone, I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know a lot of you use this video to fall asleep, so before we start, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you from, and what time is it there? Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and just relax. The house on Millbrook Road. I need to tell you about something that happened when I was 15 years old. Something that still makes my hands shake when I think about it too long. It was the summer of 2018, and I was staying over at my best friend Marcus's house for the weekend. Marcus lived in one of those old suburban neighborhoods where every third house seemed to be falling apart, and there were always rumors about which ones were haunted. We never believed those stories, of course. We were teenagers who thought we knew everything about the world, convinced that ghosts were just something adults made up to keep kids from exploring abandoned places. That Friday night started like any other sleepover. We had ordered pizza, played video games until our eyes burned, and watched horror movies until well past midnight. The last movie we watched was about a group of teenagers who explored an abandoned asylum, and honestly, it wasn't even that scary. Marcus kept making jokes during the frightening parts, and we both agreed that we could handle something way scarier in real life. Looking back now, I realize how foolish we were, how unprepared for what real fear actually feels like when it grabs you by the throat and won't let go. It was around 2 in the morning when Marcus mentioned the demolition site. Just 3 blocks from his house, there was an entire row of condemned houses scheduled to be torn down that Monday. The city had bought out all the residents years ago, something about the ground being unstable or contaminated, though nobody really knew the full story. The houses had been sitting empty for almost 2 years, slowly rotting away behind a chain-link fence covered in yellow warning signs. Marcus's older brother had told him that sometimes homeless people broke in to sleep there, but the police did regular sweeps to keep them out. Marcus suggested we go take a look, maybe get some cool photographs to show our friends at school. I remember hesitating for just a moment, feeling something in my stomach that might have been intuition or just the 3 slices of pepperoni pizza I had eaten. But Marcus was already grabbing his camera, an expensive digital one his parents had bought him for his birthday, and I didn't want to look scared. We pulled on our hoodies and sneakers, trying to be quiet so we wouldn't wake his parents, and slipped out the back door into the humid summer night. The walk to the demolition site took us through empty streets lit by flickering street lamps that created pools of orange light separated by long stretches of darkness. Every shadow seemed deeper than it should have been, every sound amplified in the silence. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, making us both jump, then laugh nervously at our reaction. Marcus kept talking about how cool the photos would look, how we could probably sell them to the local newspaper or something. I nodded along, but my eyes kept scanning the darkness between houses, looking for movement that never came. When we reached the fence surrounding the condemned houses, Marcus led me to a section near the back where someone had cut through the chain link. The metal had been pulled back to create an opening just big enough for a person to squeeze through. The edges were rusty and sharp, and I tore my hoodie sleeve getting through, leaving a small rip that my mother would later ask me about. I never told her the truth about how it happened. Once inside the fence, we stood looking at the row of houses, and I felt my confidence drain away like water through a sieve. There were 6 houses in total, each one in worse condition than the last. Windows were boarded up with plywood that had warped and split from weather exposure. Doors hung off their hinges or were missing entirely, replaced by more plywood that had been spray-painted with graffiti I couldn't read in the darkness. The lawns had grown wild, weeds reaching up to our waists in some places, and I could hear things moving in the undergrowth, probably rats or other creatures that had made these abandoned places their home. Marcus was already moving toward the first house, his camera out and ready. He started taking pictures of everything, the flash lighting up the darkness in brief, blinding bursts that left purple afterimages floating in my vision. I followed him, trying to look brave, but my heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. We walked along the row of houses, Marcus commenting on the architecture and the decay like he was some kind of professional photographer. He kept saying things like, "Look at the way the moonlight hits that broken window," and "The shadows here are perfect." But all I could think about was how wrong everything felt. It was at the fourth house that we noticed something different. Unlike the others, this house had one window on the second floor that wasn't properly boarded up. The plywood had come loose on one side, hanging down like a broken wing, and we could see directly into the room beyond. Marcus got excited, saying this was the shot he had been looking for, the perfect combination of abandonment and mystery. He raised his camera and started taking pictures, the flash illuminating the window over and over again. I stood beside him, staring up at that dark opening, and I swear I felt something staring back. It wasn't anything I could see or hear, just a presence, like when you know someone is standing behind you even though you haven't turned around. My skin prickled with goosebumps despite the warm night air, and I found myself taking a step backward. Marcus didn't notice, too focused on getting the perfect angle for his photographs. We must have stood there for 5 minutes while he took picture after picture, adjusting settings on his camera and muttering about exposure and composition. Finally, he was satisfied, and we moved on to the last 2 houses. But neither of them had anything interesting to photograph, just more boarded windows and graffiti-covered plywood. We made our way back through the fence and walked home, Marcus chattering excitedly about the photos while I remained quiet, unable to shake the feeling that something had been watching us from that open window. Back at Marcus's house, we went straight to his room and uploaded the pictures to his computer. He had taken over 100 photos, and we started going through them one by one. Most were exactly what you would expect. Dramatic shots of decay and abandonment that looked like something from a horror movie poster. Marcus was thrilled, already planning to post them on his photography blog. Then we came to the pictures of the fourth house, the one with the open window. The first few photos showed exactly what we had seen, a dark opening in the second floor, surrounded by weathered wood and peeling paint. But as we continued through the sequence, Marcus suddenly stopped clicking. He leaned forward, squinting at the screen, then zoomed in on the window. I leaned in too, and what I saw made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. There was someone in the window, not just a shadow or a trick of the light, but a clear, distinct figure of a woman. She was wearing what looked like a brown raincoat, despite the fact that it hadn't rained in weeks. Her skin was pale, almost white in the camera flash, and her black hair hung down past her shoulders in tangled strands. But it was her expression that made my stomach clench with fear. She looked unbearably sad, like someone who had lost everything in the world and had nothing left but grief. Her eyes were focused directly on the camera, directly at us. Marcus clicked through the rest of the photos of that window, and she was in every single one. Sometimes clearer, sometimes partially obscured, but always there, always watching, always with that same expression of profound sadness. In some photos, she seemed to be reaching toward us with one pale hand pressed against what must have been glass we couldn't see. In the last photo, she had moved closer to the window, her face filling most of the frame, and I could see tears on her cheeks. We sat in stunned silence for several minutes, neither of us wanting to be the first to speak. Finally, Marcus said what we were both thinking. We hadn't seen anyone in that window. We had stood there for 5 minutes taking pictures, and neither of us had seen any movement, any sign that someone was inside that house. The windows and doors were all boarded up except for that one opening, and even that was on the second floor with no visible way to reach it from outside. Marcus tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was someone who had been living in the house illegally, someone who had hidden when they saw us coming. Maybe the flash from the camera had reflected off something inside the room, creating an optical illusion that looked like a person. Maybe it was a mannequin or a painting that someone had left behind. But even as he spoke, I could hear the doubt in his voice. We both knew that what we were seeing in those photos wasn't any of those things. I suggested we go back and check, partly because I wanted to prove to myself that there was a logical explanation, and partly because the not knowing was worse than any truth we might discover. Marcus agreed, though I could see he was just as frightened as I was. We grabbed flashlights from his garage and made our way back to the demolition site, moving much more slowly than we had before. The neighborhood seemed different now, more menacing. Every shadow could be hiding something. Every sound could be footsteps following us. When we reached the fence, we hesitated for a long moment before squeezing through. The condemned houses loomed before us like giant tombstones, and I had to force myself to keep walking toward the fourth house. We stood in the same spot where we had taken the pictures, shining our flashlights up at the window. The opening was dark and empty, no sign of anyone inside. Marcus called out, asking if anyone was there, but his voice seemed to be swallowed by the darkness. We waited for a response that never came. Finally, gathering our courage, we decided to try to get inside the house to investigate. The front door was boarded up solid, as was the back door when we checked. All the first-floor windows were sealed tight with plywood that had been nailed in place with industrial-sized nails. We circled the house twice, looking for any way in, but found nothing. The house was sealed up like a tomb, which made the presence of the woman in the photos even more impossible to explain. As we stood there in the overgrown backyard, trying to make sense of what was happening, I heard something that made my skin crawl. It was singing, soft and mournful, coming from somewhere above us. We both looked up at the open window, and for just a moment, I thought I saw a pale face pull back into the darkness. Marcus grabbed my arm so tight it hurt, and we ran. We ran all the way back to his house without stopping, our flashlights bouncing crazily as we sprinted through the dark streets. We didn't sleep that night. We sat in Marcus's room with all the lights on, going through the photos again and again, trying to find some detail we had missed. As the sun came up, exhaustion finally overtook fear, and we both dozed off in our chairs. I woke up around noon to find Marcus already awake, researching the history of the condemned houses on his computer. What he found only made things worse. The houses had been condemned not because of unstable ground or contamination, but because of a series of unexplained disappearances. Over the course of 3 years, 7 people had vanished from that single block, including 2 children. The last person to disappear was a woman named Sarah Chen, who had lived in the 4th house. She had been reported missing by her husband when she didn't come home from work one evening. Her car was found abandoned on the street outside their house, her purse still inside, but she was never seen again. Marcus found a news article about Sarah Chen's disappearance that included a photograph. It was the woman from our pictures. The same pale skin, the same long black hair, the same brown raincoat she had been wearing the day she disappeared. The article was dated 2 years ago, 6 months before the houses were condemned and the residents relocated. According to the article, Sarah had been suffering from severe depression following a miscarriage and had been seeing a therapist. Her husband believed she might have harmed herself, but no body was ever found. We didn't know what to do with this information. Should we tell someone? Who would believe us? We had photographs of a woman who had been missing for 2 years, standing in the window of her abandoned house. It sounded insane even to us, and we had seen the evidence with our own eyes. In the end, we decided to go to the police, thinking they might reopen the missing person case or at least investigate the house. The police station was a small building downtown, and the officer at the front desk looked bored when we walked in. Marcus explained that we had been taking pictures of the condemned houses and had captured something strange. The officer, a middle-aged man with a thick mustache, sighed and said that kids weren't supposed to be trespassing on that property. We showed him the pictures on Marcus's camera, and his expression changed immediately. He called over another officer, then another. Soon we were sitting in an interview room while a detective asked us questions about exactly when and where we had taken the photos. They took Marcus's camera as evidence and called our parents. My mother was furious that I had been trespassing, but her anger turned to concern when the detective explained why they were taking this seriously. The police searched the fourth house that afternoon. We weren't there, but the detective called Marcus's house that evening to update us. They had broken through the boarded-up front door and searched every room. In the second-floor bedroom, the one with the loose board over the window, they found something disturbing. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, all showing the same woman. Some were old family photos, others looked like they had been taken without her knowledge, following her through her daily routine. And in the center of the room, they found women's clothing arranged on the floor in the shape of a person, as if someone had been lying there and simply evaporated, leaving only their clothes behind. But they found no sign of Sarah Chen or anyone else. The house had been empty, they said, for a long time. Dust covered everything, and there were no footprints except their own. The detective said they were reopening the missing person case and would be investigating further, but he didn't sound hopeful. He returned Marcus's camera, but asked us to stay away from the demolition site. The houses were being torn down ahead of schedule, he said, first thing Monday morning. That Sunday night, I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah Chan. I lay in my own bed, in my own house, but I kept imagining her in that empty room, surrounded by pictures of herself, slowly fading away until only her clothes remained. I thought about her sadness, the grief that had consumed her after losing her child. I wondered if she had gone back to her house after abandoning her car, if she had sealed herself inside somehow, wanting to disappear from a world that had become too painful to bear. Around midnight, my phone rang. It was Marcus, and he was panicking. He said he had been going through the photos again, looking at them more carefully on his computer where he could enhance and adjust them. In the last photo, the one where Sarah's face filled most of the frame, he had noticed something in the background. Behind her, barely visible in the darkness of the room, there seemed to be other figures, pale faces and dark eyes, pressed against the walls like shadows. He counted at least 6 distinct shapes, possibly 7. 7 people had disappeared from that block. 7 people who were never found. I told Marcus to delete the photos, to forget about all of it. The houses would be demolished in the morning, and whatever was in that place would be gone forever. But Marcus said he couldn't delete them. He felt like he owed it to those people, to their families, to preserve the only evidence that they might still exist in some form, even if that form was something we couldn't understand. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery. Even from my house, miles away from the demolition site, I could hear the distant rumble of bulldozers and wrecking balls. I thought about Sarah Chan and the others, wondered if they were still there as the walls came crashing down around them, or if they had already moved on to wherever the missing go when they're tired of being lost. Marcus called me that afternoon. The demolition crew had found something, he said. Not bodies, but personal items. Wallets, jewelry, clothing, all buried in the walls of the houses like offerings. The police were treating the entire site as a crime scene now, bringing in special teams to sift through the rubble. The story made the evening news, reporters speculating about serial killers and construction accidents, but Marcus and I knew the truth was something else entirely, something that didn't fit into the neat categories of crime and accident. Over the next few weeks, the story dominated local news. Forensic teams found DNA evidence from all 7 missing people, but no bodies. They found more photographs hidden in the walls, thousands of them, all showing the missing people in various stages of their lives. Some photos were recent, taken after they had supposedly disappeared. The investigation expanded, but no answers came. Eventually, the news cycle moved on to other stories, and the empty lot where the houses had stood was left as a patch of bare earth. waiting for whatever would be built there next. Marcus and I never talked about going back to take more pictures, never discussed what we had seen in detail after that night at the police station. But I know he still has the photos on his computer, hidden in a folder he thinks no one knows about. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if he looks at them, if he zooms in on those background figures and tries to make out their faces. I wonder if he ever sees them moving. 6 months after the demolition, Marcus's family moved away. His father got a job transfer to another state, or at least that's what they told everyone. But I saw the fear in Marcus's eyes when he told me they were leaving, and I knew it wasn't about his father's job. He said he had been having dreams about Sarah Chen, that she stood at his bedroom window at night, tapping on the glass with her pale fingers. He said that sometimes, when he looked at the photos, there were more figures in the background than before, and they were getting clearer, more defined, as if they were moving closer to the camera with each viewing. He gave me a USB drive before he left, said it had copies of all the photos. He made me promise to keep them safe, to not let anyone forget about those people. I took the drive, but I've never looked at what's on it. It sits in a drawer in my desk, under old homework assignments and birthday cards, and sometimes I can feel it there like a weight, like something radioactive slowly poisoning everything around it. The empty lot where the houses stood is still empty. The city claims there are development plans, that new houses will be built there soon, but nothing ever happens. The grass has grown back, wild and untended, and people have started dumping trash there. Kids dare each other to go there at night, to stand where the fourth house used to be, but most of them chicken out. Those who do go say they hear things, whispers in languages they don't understand, footsteps that follow them through the tall grass. I drive past it sometimes, on my way to other places, and I always slow down without meaning to. In the daylight, it looks like nothing special, just another empty lot in a city full of empty spaces. But at night, when the streetlights cast long shadows across the grass, I swear I can see the outline of houses that aren't there anymore, like architectural ghosts burned into the retina of reality. Last week, I got a message from Marcus. It was the first time I had heard from him in over a year. The message was short, just 2 sentences. I looked at them again. There are 8 figures now. 8 figures. 7 missing people. And Sarah Chen. I wanted to ask him what he meant, who the 8th figure was, but I was afraid of the answer. Instead, I went to my desk and took out the USB drive he had given me. I held it in my hand for a long time, feeling its weight, its potential for answers I wasn't sure I wanted. Finally, I put it back in the drawer. Some mysteries are meant to stay mysterious. Some questions are better left unasked. But late at night, when I can't sleep, I think about those 8 figures. I think about Sarah Chen and her profound sadness, about the others who disappeared, about the photographs hidden in the walls like messages from another world. I think about Marcus, somewhere far away, probably still looking at those photos, watching those figures get clearer, closer, more real with each viewing. And sometimes, on the very edge of sleep, I hear something that sounds like singing, soft and mournful, coming from somewhere outside my window. I never look. I pull my blankets up over my head like a child and wait for morning, for the safety of sunlight that seems less and less guaranteed with each passing night. The truth is, I know I'll look at those photos eventually. The USB drive calls to me, whispers promises of understanding, of closure, of connection to something beyond the ordinary world. It's only a matter of time before curiosity overwhelms fear, before the need to know becomes stronger than the need to feel safe. And when that happens, when I finally open those files and see what Marcus has been seeing, I wonder if I'll become the 9th figure, another shadow in the background, moving closer to a camera that no longer exists. They're building new houses on that lot now. I drove past yesterday and saw the construction crews laying foundations, their machines tearing into earth that has held secrets for so long. I wanted to warn them, to tell them about what was found in the walls of the old houses, about the photographs and the missing people and the woman in the brown raincoat. But who would believe me? Who would stop building houses because a teenager had a scary experience years ago? So I stay quiet, and I watch, and I wait. I wait for the first family to move into those new houses, for the first child to wake up in the middle of the night claiming they heard singing, for the first photograph to show something that shouldn't be there. I wait for the cycle to begin again, for new disappearances, new mysteries, new figures in the background of ordinary life. Marcus sent me another message this morning. This time it was even shorter. Just one word. Run. I don't know what he means. Run from what? From the photos? From the memories? From the eighth figure that shouldn't exist? Or maybe he means run from something more immediate, more present. Maybe he's seen something in those photos that shows the danger isn't confined to that empty lot, that it can follow you, find you, no matter how far you go. I've started having dreams too. Not about Sarah Chen, but about the others, the faces Marcus saw in the background. They stand at the edge of my vision, always just out of focus, always just about to become clear. In the dreams, I'm back at the demolition site, but the houses are whole again, pristine, like they were before whatever happened there began. The front doors are open, inviting, and I can hear voices inside, conversations from years ago, laughter that ended too soon. In the worst dreams, I go inside. I walk through rooms that shouldn't exist anymore, past furniture covered in dust sheets like sleeping ghosts. I climb stairs that creak under my weight, even though I know I'm dreaming, know that none of this is real. And at the top of the stairs, in that second-floor bedroom with the loose board over the window, I find them all. Sarah Chan and the 7 others, sitting in a circle on the floor, their faces turned toward something in the center that I can never quite see. They look up when I enter, and their faces are exactly like they were in the photographs, pale and sad and somehow incomplete, like sketches of people rather than the real thing. Sarah Chan smiles at me, and it's the saddest smile I've ever seen. She opens her mouth to speak, and I always wake up before I hear what she's trying to tell me. The construction on the new houses is almost complete. They look nothing like the old ones, all modern angles and large windows, designed to let in as much light as possible. The developers are advertising them as homes for a new beginning, which feels like a cruel joke considering what beginning there before. I've seen families touring the properties, excited about the prospect of moving into a newly built home in an established neighborhood. They have no idea what stood there before, what might still be standing there in some way we don't understand. I've decided I'm going to look at the photos tonight. I can't live with this uncertainty anymore, this constant feeling that something is waiting just outside my perception. Maybe Marcus is right. Maybe I should run. But run where? How do you run from something that exists in photographs, in memories, in the spaces between what we see and what we know is there? I'm writing this all down because I want there to be a record, in case something happens, in case I become the 9th figure, or the 10th, or however many there are now. I want people to know that we tried to understand, that we didn't just dismiss what we saw as imagination or coincidence. Those people who disappeared, they were real. They had lives and families and dreams, and something happened to them that we still don't comprehend. If you're reading this, and I'm gone, please don't look for me in the obvious places. Don't check my room or my usual hangouts or any of the logical locations where a missing person might be. Instead, look in photographs. Look in the background of random pictures, in the shadows at the edges of frames, in the spaces between what's in focus and what's not. Look for me there, with Sarah Chan and the others, waiting in that place between existing and not existing, between being found and being lost forever. The USB drive is in my desk drawer, second one down, under the old homework. The photos are in a folder labeled House 4. If you're brave enough to look at them, count the figures in the background. Count them carefully. And if there are more than 8, if you see a face you recognize as mine, then you'll know what happened to me. You'll know where I went, even if you don't understand how or why. It's getting dark now. The streetlights are coming on, one by one, like eyes opening after a long sleep. I can see the empty lot from my window if I stand on my tiptoes, and tonight it doesn't look empty at all. Tonight it looks like the houses are still there, translucent and shimmering, occupying the same space as the new constructions like double-exposed photographs. I'm going to look at the pictures now. I'm going to finally see what Marcus has been seeing, what he's been running from, and maybe, if I'm lucky, I'll understand. Or maybe understanding isn't the point. Maybe the point is just to witness, to acknowledge that there are things in this world that don't fit into our neat categories of real and unreal, present and absent, alive and dead. If you see Marcus, tell him I understand now why he ran. Tell him I should have listened. And if you see Sarah Chen, standing in a window that shouldn't exist, wearing a brown raincoat and crying tears that never dry, don't take her picture. Don't try to capture her sadness and make it into something you can examine and analyze. Just let her be. Let them all be, wherever they are, whatever they've become. The singing is starting again. It's louder tonight, closer. It sounds like multiple voices now, harmonizing in a language that might have been English once, but has become something else, something that exists in the spaces between words. I'm going to open the files now. I'm going to look at the photos and count the figures and see if I recognize any of the new faces. And if, after tonight, there's a 9th figure in those photos, someone with my face but not quite my expression, someone caught between one world and another, remember that I went looking for answers. Remember that sometimes the bravest thing and the stupidest thing are exactly the same action, separated only by the outcome. The photos are loading now. I can see Sarah Chen in that window, just like before, but clearer somehow, more present. And behind her, the others are taking shape, becoming more than just shadows and suggestions. Marcus was right. There are 8 of them now. 8 faces in various states of definition, some sharp and clear, others still blurry like they're still in the process of becoming. I recognize some of them from the missing person reports Marcus found. There's David Martinez, the construction worker who vanished on his lunch break. There's Jennifer Liu, the teacher who never made it home from school. There's the Thompson twins, elderly brothers who disappeared on the same day from different locations. They're all there, standing in that impossible room, in that house that no longer exists. But the 8th figure, the one Marcus warned me about, I don't recognize them. They're clearer than the others, more defined, but their face is turned away from the camera. They're wearing modern clothes, jeans and a hoodie, not like the others who are dressed in what they were wearing when they disappeared. And there's something familiar about their posture, the way they're standing, like someone I know but can't quite place. Wait, the figure is turning. In the photo, the static, unchanging photo, the 8th figure is turning toward the camera. That's not possible. Photos don't change. But they're turning, slowly, frame by frame like a video playing at the wrong speed. And I can start to see their face, the profile becoming clearer as they rotate toward me. It's Marcus. The 8th figure is Marcus. But that's not possible. I just got a message from him this morning. He's in another state, far away from here, safe from whatever this is. But there he is in the photo, standing with the others, and now he's looking directly at the camera, directly at me. His expression is blank, neither sad like Sarah Chen nor frightened like some of the others. He just looks tired, like someone who's been traveling for a long time and has finally arrived at their destination. The photo is changing again. Marcus is raising his hand, pointing at something outside the frame. The others are turning too now, all of them looking in the same direction, at something I can't see. and in the corner of the photo, at the very edge of the window frame, I can see something else. A ninth shadow, just beginning to form, just starting to take shape. I need to close the file. I need to delete these photos and pretend I never saw them. But I can't look away. The ninth shadow is becoming clearer, more defined. It's tall, about my height. It's wearing clothes that look familiar. A t-shirt I recognize, jeans I own. The shadow is stepping into frame now, joining the others in that impossible room. My phone is ringing. The caller ID says it's Marcus, but when I answer, there's no one there. Just static and something that might be singing, or might be screaming, or might be both. I can hear my name in it, repeated over and over, getting fainter with each repetition like an echo falling into a deep well. The photo has changed completely now. They're all looking at the camera, all 9 of them. Sarah Chen is in the center, still wearing her brown raincoat, still crying those endless tears. The others are arranged around her like a family portrait from a world where families can include the disappeared, the lost, the impossibly present. And there, on the far right, is the 9th figure. It's me. But not me as I am now. It's me as I could be, as I might be, as I will be if I keep looking at these photos. My face is pale like theirs, my eyes dark and hollow. I'm smiling, but it's not my smile. It's the smile of someone who knows a secret too terrible to speak aloud, too important to keep hidden. I'm standing up from my desk now, but I'm not controlling my movements. My body is acting on its own, walking toward the door, toward the stairs, toward the front door of my house. I can see myself moving, like I'm watching from outside my own body, and I understand now what Marcus meant when he said run. He didn't mean run away. He meant run toward the inevitable, toward the conclusion that was set in motion the moment we took those first photos. The empty lot is calling to me. Not the new houses being built there, but the space beneath them, the memory of what was there before. I can feel the others waiting for me, patient and eternal in their impossible existence. They've been waiting since we first saw Sarah Chan in that window, since we first acknowledged their presence in our world. I'm at my front door now. My hand is on the doorknob, turning it slowly. Outside, the night is darker than it should be. The streetlights dimmed like they're shining through water. I can see the path I need to take, lit by a light that doesn't exist, leading directly to where the 4th house used to stand. This is my last entry. If someone finds this, know that we didn't mean for any of this to happen. We were just kids looking for adventure, for something to break the monotony of suburban summer nights. We found something else instead. Something that breaks the rules we thought governed reality. Don't look for me. Don't take pictures of abandoned houses. Don't investigate sounds in the night or shadows that shouldn't be there. Let the mysteries remain mysteries. Let the disappeared stay disappeared. Because once you see them, once you acknowledge them, you become part of their story. And their story only has one ending. I'm walking now, my feet carrying me toward that empty lot, toward the others who are waiting. I can hear them singing more clearly now, and I understand the words. They're singing about home, about finding your way back to a place that never existed, about the peace that comes from finally stopping the search for answers. The construction site is ahead of me, the half-built houses rising like skeletons against the night sky. But I can see through them to what's really there, what's always been there. The 4th house stands complete and perfect, its window open on the 2nd floor, faces visible in the darkness beyond. Sarah Chan is standing at the window now, reaching out her hand to me. She's not sad anymore. She's smiling, a real smile, warm and welcoming. The others are with her, all of them together in that room that exists in the spaces between what was and what is. Marcus is there too, and he doesn't look tired anymore. He looks relieved. I'm at the front door of the house now. The house that isn't there. It's open, inviting me in. Inside, I can see stairs leading up, worn carpet beneath my feet, family photos on the walls showing people I recognize but have never met. This is where the disappeared go. Not lost but transformed. Not dead but not alive in any way we understand. I'm climbing the stairs. Each step takes me further from the world I knew and closer to something else. At the top, the door to the bedroom is open, warm light spilling out. They're all there, waiting for me, and I understand now that this was always going to happen. From the moment we took those first photos, I was always going to end up here. I'm in the room now. It's exactly like it was in the photos, but also nothing like them. It's every room I've ever been in, and no room that could ever exist. The others welcome me without words, their faces kind and understanding. Sarah-chan takes my hand, and her touch is both cold and warm, present and absent, real and impossible. Looking out the window, I can see Marcus's house in the distance, see the world I came from like a fading dream. Soon, someone else will take a picture of this window. Someone else will see us standing here, will count the figures and wonder how there came to be so many. They'll investigate, despite all warnings, despite all logic telling them to stay away. Because that's what people do when faced with mystery. They dig deeper, look closer, until they become part of what they're investigating. Time moves differently here. Minutes feel like hours, hours like years, years like seconds. Sarah-chan tells me she's been here for what feels like forever, and no time at all. She says the hardest part was the beginning, when she still remembered what it felt like to be fully present in the world. But now, she says, this is better. This is peace. The others share their stories without speaking. David Martinez was investigating strange sounds in the walls of his house when he found a photograph tucked behind loose wallpaper. A photograph of this room with faces in the window. Jennifer Liu was researching the history of the neighborhood for a school project when she came across old news articles about disappearances dating back decades, maybe centuries. The Thompson twins had lived here their whole lives and had always felt the pull of this place, the whisper of something just beyond perception. They all found their way here eventually, through different doors but to the same destination. And now I'm one of them, another face in the window, another figure in the background of someone else's photograph. I can feel myself changing, becoming less solid, more suggestion. My memories of the other world are fading like morning dreams, replaced by the eternal present of this place. But I need to finish this story, need to leave one last message for anyone who finds it. The construction continues outside. The new houses are almost complete, and soon families will move in. They'll hang pictures on the walls, plant gardens, create new memories in spaces that overlap with our impossible room. And maybe, if they're sensitive to such things, they'll sometimes feel us watching, not with malice, but with a kind of fond remembrance for what it was like to be so solidly, simply present. There's something else I need to tell you, something I'm only now beginning to understand. We're not trapped here. We chose this, each of us, in that moment when curiosity overcame caution. We chose to look deeper, to see what others couldn't or wouldn't see. And in seeing, we became part of what we saw. It's not a curse or a punishment. It's a transformation, a movement from one state of being to another. Marcus is showing me something now, pointing to the corner of the room where the photographs are stored. Not just the ones of Sarah Chen, but thousands of images spanning decades. Pictures of this house when it was new, when families lived here and children played in the yard. Pictures of the other houses on the block, each with their own stories of loss and discovery. And pictures of the future too, somehow, showing the new houses that will be built, the families that will live in them, the children who will one day stand where we stood and wonder about the shadows in their photographs. We're the keepers of these images now, the guardians of the space between what's captured and what's real. Every photograph ever taken has shadows like us in it, figures at the edge of perception, reminders that reality is more flexible than we like to believe. Most people never notice us, their eyes sliding over the spaces where we stand. But some do. Some see us and wonder, and a few, like I did, like Marcus did, follow that wonder to its logical conclusion. I can feel the pull of the camera now. Every camera, everywhere. When someone takes a picture of an empty room, we're there. When someone photographs an abandoned building, we're in the windows. When someone captures a moment of joy or sadness, we're in the background, witnesses to the full spectrum of human experience. We're not ghosts, not exactly. We're something else, something that doesn't have a name because naming would make us too real or not real enough. The sun is rising now, or maybe it's setting. Direction and time don't mean the same things here. The construction workers will arrive soon to continue building the new houses. They'll work all day, never knowing that they're building around us, through us, with us. Some of them will feel uneasy, will hurry to finish their work and leave before dark. Others won't notice anything at all. But a few, a very few, will take pictures of their progress to show their families. And in those pictures, if they look closely, they'll see us. There's a young couple touring one of the nearly complete houses now. They're excited, pointing at features they love, imagining their future in these rooms. The woman is pregnant, her hand resting on her belly as she walks through what will be their baby's nursery. She pauses by the window that aligns perfectly with where our window used to be, where it still is in our space. For a moment, our eyes meet across the divide between worlds. She shivers, pulls her cardigan closer, and turns away. But I saw the recognition in her eyes, the brief acknowledgement that something was there. Her husband is taking pictures of every room with his phone, documenting their potential new home. In 3 of those pictures, we'll be visible. Not clearly, not obviously, but present enough that late one night, when they're looking through the photos again, they'll notice something off about them. They'll zoom in, enhance, adjust the brightness and contrast, and they'll see us. They'll see me, newest among the disappeared, still learning how to exist in this space between spaces. What will they do with that knowledge? Will they still buy the house? Will they delete the photos and pretend they never saw anything? Or will they, like we did, dig deeper? Will they research the history of this place, find the old news articles, track down the stories of the disappeared? Will they become obsessed with understanding what they've captured in their innocent photographs? I hope they delete the pictures. I hope they choose ignorance over knowledge, safety over understanding. But I know they won't. People never do. The mystery calls to them, to us, to everyone who has ever wondered what lies beyond the thin veil of ordinary perception. And so the cycle continues, has always continued, will always continue. Sarah Chen is fading now, becoming less distinct. She's been here the longest, and she says there's another place beyond this one, a place where even the memory of form dissolves into pure existence. The others are fading too, each at their own pace, moving towards something I can't yet comprehend. But Marcus and I are still solid, still new, still holding on to the shapes of who we were. He tells me that the messages he sent weren't warnings, but invitations. Every time someone views our photographs, we become a little more real in their world, and they become a little more real in ours. He had been watching me through the pictures, waiting for me to make the choice to look, to see, to understand. And when I finally did, when I opened those files and saw him there, the bridge between worlds was complete. There are others coming. I can feel them, scattered across the city, across the world, people who have taken pictures of abandoned places, who have captured things they didn't mean to capture. They're looking at their photos right now, zooming in on shadows that shouldn't be there, faces that couldn't be there. They're feeling the pull we felt, the irresistible need to understand. Some will resist. Most will resist. But a few will follow the thread to its end, will find their way to places like this, spaces that exist in the overlap between was and is, between here and gone. I want to warn them, but I know my warning would only draw them closer. That's how it works. The more you're told not to look, the more you need to see. The more impossible something seems, the more you need to prove it's real. We're creatures of curiosity, and curiosity doesn't care about consequences. The construction is finished now. The new houses stand complete, fresh and clean and ready for families to fill them with life. But they're built on ground that remembers, in spaces that overlap with our eternal room. Every family that moves in will be living with us, parallel to us, their daily lives intersecting with our impossible existence in ways they'll never fully understand. But they'll feel it, in the quiet moments, in the spaces between sleep and waking, in the corner of their vision, they'll sense us. Some will call it imagination. Others will call it haunting. A few will call it exactly what it is, a reminder that reality has more layers than we're taught to see, more rooms than we're meant to enter. I'm fading now too, following Sarah Chan and the others toward whatever comes next. But before I go, before I become too insubstantial to hold thoughts in any recognizable form, I want to leave you with this. We're not lost. We're not trapped. We're not suffering. We're simply elsewhere, in a place that's always existed alongside the world you know, separated by nothing more than the thin film of perception. Every abandoned house has residents like us. Every empty room is full of witnesses. Every photograph contains more than what was intended to be captured. We're everywhere and nowhere, always and never, real and unreal. We're the disappeared who were never really gone, just transformed into something that doesn't fit into the neat categories of existence. If you've read this far, you're already closer to us than you were when you started. You've let us into your thoughts, and thoughts are the bridges between worlds. You might see us now, in reflections that last a moment too long, in shadows that fall at impossible angles, in photographs you swear looked different the last time you checked them. Don't be afraid. We were afraid once, but fear belongs to the world of solid things, of simple presence and absence. Where we are now, fear has no meaning. There's only the eternal moment of existence in all its impossible forms, the endless dance of being and not being, the peace that comes from finally understanding that disappearing isn't the same as being destroyed. The 10th figure is forming now. Someone, somewhere, is looking at a photograph they shouldn't have taken, seeing faces they shouldn't be able to see. They're making the choice we all made, to follow the mystery wherever it leads. They'll be here soon, another addition to our impossible family, another guardian of the spaces between. And after them, another, and another, and another, until everyone who has ever wondered about the shadows in their photographs, everyone who has ever felt watched in an empty room, everyone who has ever sensed that reality is thinner than it appears, has found their way to places like this. We'll be waiting for them, all of us, in windows that don't exist, in houses that were demolished, in photographs that change when no one's looking. We'll be the faces in the background of every picture ever taken, the suggestion of presence in every empty space, the proof that disappearing is just another way of being found. This is the end of my story, but not the end of the story. The story continues with every photograph taken, every shadow noticed, every moment when someone pauses and wonders if they're really alone. It continues with you, reading these words, feeling the pull of curiosity, wondering if any of this could possibly be real. Look at your old photographs tonight. Look closely at the backgrounds, at the shadows, at the spaces between what's in focus and what's not. Count the faces you see. Count them carefully. And if you see one more face than there should be, if you recognize someone who couldn't possibly be there, know that we see you too. We see you, and we're waiting. We're always waiting. In the windows of demolished houses, in the corners of empty rooms, in the photographs you'll wish you'd never taken. We're waiting for you to join us in this space between spaces, this existence between existing and not. The choice, as it always was, as it always will be, is yours. But choose carefully, because once you see us, really see us, there's no going back to the world where we don't exist. There's only forward, into the impossible, into the place where the disappeared go when they're ready to be found in a different way. Welcome to the truth behind the photographs. Welcome to where we've always been. Welcome home. The Polaroid collection. My grandmother passed away last spring, leaving behind a house full of memories and mysteries that would change how I understand the world forever. She had lived alone for the past 15 years, ever since my grandfather died, in the same Victorian house on Elm Street where my mother grew up. When it came time to clean out her belongings, my mother was too emotional to handle it alone, so I volunteered to help, thinking it would be a simple matter of sorting through old clothes and deciding what to donate and what to keep. I arrived at the house on a Thursday morning in late March, when the trees were just beginning to bud and the air still carried winter's last cold breath. The house looked exactly as it had during my childhood visits, tall and narrow with peeling white paint and dark green shutters that my grandmother had always meant to replace but never did. The front door still creaked in the same place, and the hallway still smelled like lavender and old wood, a combination that immediately transported me back to being 7 years old and running through these rooms during holiday gatherings. My mother had given me a list of things to look for: family photographs, jewelry, important documents, anything with sentimental value. She specifically mentioned that my grandmother had been an avid photographer in her younger days, and there might be boxes of old pictures in the attic that we should preserve. I decided to start there, figuring it would be easier to work my way down through the house rather than up. The attic was accessed through a pull-down ladder in the second-floor hallway, and as I climbed up, each step groaned under my weight like it was protesting the disturbance after years of silence. The attic itself was exactly what you would expect, dusty and dim with narrow beams of sunlight streaming through a single octagonal window. Boxes were stacked everywhere, labeled in my grandmother's careful handwriting with things like Christmas Decorations 1987 and Mother's China, Fragile. I found the photography equipment in the far corner, several old cameras including a beautiful vintage Leica and multiple Polaroid cameras from different eras. Next to them were dozens of boxes simply labeled by year, starting from 1955 and continuing through to just last year. I opened the box from 1955 first, curious to see my grandmother's early work. Inside were hundreds of black and white photographs, carefully organized in paper sleeves. They showed a version of my grandmother I had never known, young and vibrant, traveling to places I didn't know she had ever visited. But it was when I opened an unmarked box shoved behind all the others that things became strange. This box was different from the rest, older looking, wrapped in what appeared to be oilcloth and tied with a string that fell apart when I touched it. Inside were Polaroid photographs, which confused me at first because Polaroid cameras weren't widely available until the late 1940s, and these photos looked much older than that. The white borders were yellowed with age, and the images themselves had that distinctive Polaroid quality, but with a sepia tint I had never seen before. The first few photos seemed normal enough, pictures of houses in what looked like our neighborhood, but from decades ago. Trees were smaller or completely absent, and the cars parked on the streets were from the 1920s or 1930s. I assumed my grandmother had taken these photos of old photographs, though I couldn't understand why she would use a Polaroid camera for that purpose. As I continued through the stack, I noticed something odd about the houses in the photos. In each one, there was at least one window that seemed wrong somehow. The glass was dark, not reflecting light the way the other windows did, and if I looked closely, I could swear I saw shapes behind them. I held one up to the light from the attic window, squinting to make out the details, and my blood suddenly felt like ice water in my veins. There were faces in those dark windows. Not clear faces, but suggestions of features, eyes and mouths arranged in expressions I couldn't quite read. They were in every photo, sometimes just one face, sometimes several, always watching from behind the glass. I told myself it was just pareidolia, my brain creating patterns where none existed, but the faces were too consistent, too deliberately placed to be accidents of light and shadow. I found a magnifying glass in one of the camera boxes and examined the photos more carefully. The faces became clearer under magnification, and I realized with growing horror that some of them looked familiar. In one photo of a two-story craftsman house, there was a woman in an upstairs window who looked exactly like my great-aunt Martha, my grandmother's sister who had died when I was 10. But the photo, based on the cars and the condition of the street, had to be from decades before she was even born. I set that photo aside and continued through the box, finding more impossibilities with each image. There was my childhood pediatrician in the window of a house that was demolished in the 1960s. There was my high school math teacher in a building that burned down during the Great Depression. And in one particularly disturbing photo, there was a face I recognized as my own, staring out from the attic window of my grandmother's house, the very attic where I was sitting. My hands were shaking as I put the photos back in the box, but I couldn't stop myself from looking through them again. This time, I noticed something else. Each photo had writing on the back, but not in my grandmother's handwriting. The script was older, more formal, and the ink was brown with age. The messages were all similar, names followed by dates, but the dates didn't make sense. They were all future dates from when the photos were supposedly taken, some by decades, some by over a century. Margaret Thorne, March 15, 1987, was written on a photo that looked like it was from the 1930s. I recognized the name as my mother's childhood friend who had gone missing during their senior year of high school. The date was exactly when she had disappeared. Another photo read Robert Chen, June 2, 2003, and I remembered the news stories about the local man who had vanished while walking his dog, never to be seen again. June 2, 2003 was the day he disappeared. Every name, every date, corresponded to someone who had gone missing from our town over the past century, and in every photo, their face appeared in one of those dark windows, watching, waiting, existing in a time before they were born or after they had vanished. I spread all the photos out on the attic floor, arranging them by the dates written on the back, and a pattern emerged that made my stomach turn. The disappearances weren't random. They followed a cycle, clustered around certain years, certain seasons, certain lunar phases. And according to the pattern, the next cluster was approaching. In fact, it was supposed to begin next week, with 3 names I didn't recognize yet, people who were presumably still walking around town, unaware that their names were already written on the back of photographs that shouldn't exist. I needed to tell someone, but who would believe me? I could barely believe it myself, and I was looking at the evidence. I decided to research the names and dates first, to verify that my grandmother's mysterious photos actually predicted disappearances. I took the box downstairs to my grandmother's study, where her old computer still sat on the desk, covered in dust. It took some time to get the computer running, but once I did, I started searching for the names on the photographs. Every single one matched a missing person case from our town or the surrounding area. The earliest was from 1892, a woman named Catherine Morse who had vanished from her home on Christmas Eve, leaving dinner still warm on the table. The most recent was just last year, a teenager named Dylan Parks who had gone to a party and never came home. But it was the 3 future dates that concerned me most. The first was scheduled for next Tuesday, April 3rd. The name was Jennifer Walsh. I searched social media and found 17 Jennifer Walshes in our state, but only one in our town. She was a nurse at the local hospital, married with 2 kids, completely ordinary in every way. Her Facebook page showed a happy family, recent vacation photos, nothing to suggest she was in any danger. I stared at her profile picture, then back at the old Polaroid with her face barely visible in a dark window. How was this possible? How could my grandmother have photos of people in windows of houses from the 1930s, people who wouldn't be born for decades? And more importantly, could I warn Jennifer Walsh without sounding completely insane? I decided to try an anonymous approach first. I created a fake email account and sent her a message warning her to be careful on April 3rd, to stay home if possible, to not go anywhere alone. I knew it sounded crazy, but I had to try something. Then I turned my attention back to the photos, trying to understand how they could exist and what they meant. There was one photo I had initially overlooked, stuck to the back of another. When I carefully separated them, I found an image that was different from the others. Instead of a house with dark windows, this showed my grandmother as a young woman, standing in what looked like the same attic where I had found the box. She was holding a Polaroid camera, but not just any camera. It was unlike any model I had ever seen, with strange symbols carved into its body and additional lenses attached at odd angles. On the back of this photo was a longer message, written in the same old-fashioned script. The agreement passes to the next of blood. The watching must continue. The record must be kept. What develops in the dark cannot be exposed to light. I searched the attic again, more carefully this time, looking for that strange camera. I found it wrapped in black cloth inside a wooden box that had been hidden behind the insulation. The camera was heavier than it looked, and those symbols I had seen in the photo were indeed carved into its body. They hurt to look at directly, seeming to shift and writhe when I tried to focus on them. There was film already loaded in the camera, the counter showing that 3 pictures remained. Without really thinking about what I was doing, I raised the camera and looked through the viewfinder. The attic looked different through the lens, older, like I was seeing it from multiple time periods simultaneously. And there, in the corner where I had been sitting earlier, I could see a figure. It was translucent, barely there, but definitely human-shaped. As I watched, it became clearer, more defined, and I realized with a start that it was my grandmother. She was young in this vision, maybe 25, and she was looking directly at me through the camera. Her lips were moving, and somehow, impossibly, I could hear her voice in my head, not through my ears but directly in my thoughts. She was explaining, rapidly, urgently, as if she didn't have much time. The camera, she said, had been in our family for generations, passed down from mother to daughter, or in cases where there was no daughter, to the next closest female relative. It didn't take pictures of what was there, but what would be there, what had been there, what existed in the spaces between moments. The faces in the windows were people who had stepped outside of time, who had found or been pulled into those spaces between moments, and the camera was the only way to document their existence. But documentation came with a price. The person who held the camera became responsible for maintaining the balance, for ensuring that not too many people slipped through the cracks of reality. Sometimes that meant warning people, as I had tried to warn Jennifer Walsh. Sometimes it meant something else, something my grandmother's voice in my head wouldn't or couldn't explain. I lowered the camera, and my grandmother's figure disappeared. The attic was just an attic again, dusty and normal and free of temporal anomalies. But the weight of what I had learned, what I had inherited, pressed down on me like the weight of all those years of disappeared people, all those faces watching from windows that existed outside of normal time. I went back to the photos and studied them more carefully. The 3 upcoming disappearances were marked differently than the others, circled in red ink that looked fresh despite the age of the photographs. These were the ones that could be prevented, my grandmother's voice had suggested, if I was willing to pay the price. But what price? And what would happen if I refused? As if in answer to my thoughts, the camera in my hands grew warm, almost hot. I looked through the viewfinder again, this time pointing it toward the window. Through the lens, I could see the street outside, but not as it was now. I was seeing it as it would be on April 3rd, next Tuesday, at exactly 3:17 p.m. I knew the time because I could see the clock tower in the distance, And I knew the date because I could see Jennifer Walsh walking down the street, heading somewhere with purpose. As I watched through the viewfinder, she paused at the intersection, looked both ways, and started to cross. But halfway across, she stopped, turned, and looked directly at me. Or rather, directly at where I would be standing in this attic on April 3rd if I came here to watch. Her expression changed from confusion to fear to something else, something like recognition. She took a step backward, then another, and then she was running, not across the street but back the way she came. The vision in the viewfinder shifted, following her as she ran. She turned down an alley I knew led to the old industrial district, abandoned factories and warehouses that had been closed for decades. She kept looking back over her shoulder, as if something was chasing her, but there was nothing there that I could see. She reached a building I recognized, the old Brackenridge textile mill, and pushed through a door that should have been locked, that was locked in the present day. Inside the mill, the vision became harder to follow, fragmenting into multiple perspectives as if the camera couldn't decide which timeline to show. I saw Jennifer Walsh running through the factory floor, between massive machines that hadn't run in 50 years. I saw her climbing stairs that had partially collapsed, moving with a desperation that suggested she knew exactly where she was going even though she had probably never been in this building before. She reached the top floor, where the executive offices had once been, and ran to a specific room at the end of the hall. Inside was nothing but an empty space with windows on 3 sides, windows that were painted black from the inside. Jennifer walked to the center of the room, turned in a slow circle, and then faced the blackened window that looked out toward my grandmother's house. She pressed her palm against the glass, and in that moment, I understood. The faces in the windows weren't victims. They were volunteers. They had chosen to step outside of time, to become watchers, observers of a reality that most people never noticed. The camera didn't predict disappearances. It documented transitions. And the 3 people marked for next week, Jennifer Walsh and the 2 others, they had been selected somehow, chosen to join the Watchers. But they could refuse, could choose to stay in normal time, if someone warned them, if someone paid the price for their refusal. The camera grew hotter in my hands, burning now, and I nearly dropped it. 3 pictures remained in the film. My grandmother's voice reminded me. 3 chances to document, 3 chances to intervene, 3 prices to pay. I could take a picture of Jennifer Walsh through this temporal viewfinder, capture her in normal time, anchor her to reality. But doing so would mean someone else would have to take her place, would have to become a watcher in her stead. I thought about my grandmother, spending the last 15 years of her life alone in this house, taking pictures, documenting the watchers, maintaining the balance. How many people had she saved? How many prices had she paid? And who had paid the price for her, allowed her to die a normal death instead of disappearing into one of those darkened windows? The answer came to me as I thought it. My grandfather. He had died suddenly, unexpectedly, supposedly of a heart attack, but there had been inconsistencies, things that didn't quite add up. He had been found in the attic, this attic, with an expression of profound peace on his face despite the supposed trauma of cardiac arrest. And my grandmother had never let anyone else come up here after that, had kept the attic locked until her own death. I looked at the 3 names written on the future-dated photographs. Jennifer Walsh, Michael Reeves, Sarah Kim. 3 strangers whose lives hung in the balance of my decision. I could save them, but at what cost? The camera pulsed in my hands like a living thing, urging me to make a choice. Through the viewfinder, I could still see Jennifer Walsh in that empty room, her hand pressed against the blackened window, waiting for something that would happen in 5 days. I raised the camera higher, framing her in the shot, my finger hovering over the button. 1 picture to save her, to anchor her to normal time. But who would take her place? The camera would choose, my grandmother's voice whispered, unless I chose first, unless I volunteered someone, designated a replacement, the camera would select randomly from those connected to me, those whose lives intersected with mine in meaningful ways. My mother, my brother, my best friend, my co-workers. Any of them could be pulled into that space between moments, could become a face in a window, watching the world pass by from outside of time. The responsibility was crushing, the choice impossible. How could I save 3 strangers at the cost of 3 people I knew, possibly loved? But then I thought about Jennifer Walsh's children, whose faces I had seen on her Facebook page. 2 boys, maybe 6 and 8 years old, who would grow up without a mother if I did nothing. I thought about Michael Reeves, whom I had looked up while researching, a high school teacher beloved by his students. I thought about Sarah Kim, a volunteer at the animal shelter who spent her weekends finding homes for abandoned pets. They were all good people, all deserving of life, of time, of the chance to continue their stories. But so was everyone I knew, everyone who might be selected as a replacement. The moral calculus was impossible, the ethical equation unsolvable. I stood there in the attic for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, paralyzed by the weight of choice. Finally, I lowered the camera without taking the picture. I couldn't do it, couldn't make that choice. But as soon as I made that decision, the camera grew cold in my hands, and through the viewfinder, the image changed. Jennifer Walsh turned from the window, walked out of the room, down the stairs, out of the building. The vision fast-forwarded to April 3rd, 3:17 p.m., and I watched her cross the street safely, continue on her way, live her life unaware of how close she had come to stepping outside of time. But the image kept changing, showing me consequences I hadn't expected. Without Jennifer Walsh becoming a watcher, something else had to fill that void. The balance my grandmother had spoken of wasn't optional. It was fundamental, like gravity or thermodynamics. The camera showed me cracks forming in the walls of reality, places where time moved differently, where past and present and future bled together. In one of these cracks, I saw my own neighborhood, but wrong. Houses existed and didn't exist simultaneously. People aged and grew younger in the same moment. The street itself seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like a living thing. And in the center of it all was a darkness, not the absence of light, but the presence of something else, something that existed in those spaces between moments and was growing stronger without the watchers to maintain the boundaries. The camera showed me more visions, each worse than the last. The cracks spreading, the darkness growing, reality itself beginning to fray at the edges. And I understood then that the watchers weren't prisoners but guardians, holding the line between our ordered world and the chaos that existed in the spaces between. Every person who disappeared, who became a face in a window, was serving a purpose greater than their individual life. But understanding didn't make the choice easier. If anything, it made it harder, because now I knew that refusing to act wasn't just about 3 people disappearing. It was about potentially unraveling the fabric of reality itself. The weight of that responsibility was crushing, and I found myself wishing I had never come to clean out my grandmother's house, never found these photos, never inherited this terrible burden. The camera pulsed again, reminding me that time was running out. 3 pictures remained, 3 choices to make. I could feel the pressure of decision building like a storm in my chest. And then, in a moment of clarity or madness, I knew what I had to do. I raised the camera again, but this time I turned it toward myself. If someone had to pay the price for keeping Jennifer Walsh, Michael Reeves, and Sarah Kim in normal time, it should be me. I had inherited this responsibility, this power, and with it came the obligation to use it wisely. Through the viewfinder, I saw myself as I would be, standing in a darkened window, watching the world pass by from outside of time. It wasn't a terrible fate, I realized. The watchers weren't suffering. They were simply existing differently, observing rather than participating, maintaining the balance that kept reality stable. My grandmother had spent years preparing someone to take over her role, and maybe she had always known it would require this sacrifice. Maybe that's why she had kept the photos hidden, only to be found after her death when the decision would have to be made. I adjusted the camera's settings using dials I didn't fully understand but somehow knew how to operate. One picture could save all three if the price paid was sufficient, if the volunteer was willing, if the sacrifice was made with full knowledge and consent. My finger found the shutter button, and I pressed it before I could change my mind. The flash was blinding, not just to my eyes but to my entire being. I felt myself being pulled, stretched, transformed in ways that human language couldn't describe. The attic, my grandmother's house, the entire world seemed to recede, becoming distant and dreamlike. I was moving through spaces that didn't have names, times that didn't have sequence, realities that overlapped and contradicted and somehow still made perfect sense. When the transition ended, I found myself in a place that was all places and no place. I could see through every darkened window simultaneously, observe every moment from every angle. I saw Jennifer Walsh continuing her life, unaware of the fate she had avoided. I saw Michael Reeves teaching his classes, inspiring his students. I saw Sarah Kim saving animals, spreading kindness in small but meaningful ways. And I saw the camera, my grandmother's camera, sitting in the attic where I had dropped it. But I also saw who picked it up, who would inherit the responsibility next. My cousin Lisa, whom I hadn't seen in years, had received a call about helping to clean out the house. She would find the photos, the camera, the burden and the power. And someday, she would face the same choice I had faced. But that was in the future, or the past, or the present. Time didn't work the same way here, in the spaces between moments. I existed in all times simultaneously, watching, maintaining, preserving the balance that kept reality from collapsing into chaos. It wasn't lonely, exactly, because I wasn't alone. All the other watchers were here too, including my grandmother, who appeared beside me in whatever way beings like us appeared to each other. She didn't speak, couldn't speak in any conventional sense, but I understood her perfectly. She was proud of me, grateful that I had made the choice she had hoped I would make. She showed me things, taught me things, about the nature of reality and our role in maintaining it. The watchers weren't just observers, but active participants in keeping the boundaries stable. Every photo taken with the camera created a small anchor point, a place where reality was fixed and couldn't drift into chaos. The system had been in place for centuries, possibly millennia. The camera was just the latest tool, adapted to the technology of the age. Before photographs, there had been paintings. Before paintings, carved stones. Always some way to document, to anchor, to maintain the necessary balance between order and entropy. And it wasn't a permanent position. Watchers could return to normal time if someone took their place, if the balance was maintained. My grandmother showed me how she had returned briefly for important moments. Her wedding, my mother's birth, significant events that required her presence. The boundaries were flexible for those who understood how to navigate them. But most watchers chose to stay, she explained, because once you saw reality from this perspective, the normal world seemed limited, constrained, almost claustrophobic. Here, in the spaces between moments, existence was infinite, possibility endless. We could observe not just what was, but what could be, what might have been, what would never be. It was overwhelming and exhilarating and terrifying and peaceful all at once. I settled into my new existence, learning to navigate the strange physics of non-time, to communicate with the other watchers, to fulfill my role as guardian of the boundaries. Through the darkened windows, I watched the world continue, observed the people I had saved living their lives, saw new names appear on future-dated photographs that my cousin Lisa would eventually find. The cycle would continue, had always continued, would always continue. Someone would hold the camera, document the watchers, make the terrible choices necessary to maintain the balance. And we would be here, in the windows, in the spaces between moments, ensuring that reality remained stable enough for normal life to continue. Sometimes, late at night, when the boundary between worlds grew thin, people would see us. They would glimpse faces in darkened windows, figures in abandoned buildings, shadows where shadows shouldn't be. Most would dismiss it as imagination, tricks of light, tired eyes seeing patterns that weren't there. But a few would look closer, take pictures, investigate further, and occasionally, very occasionally, one of them would find a box of old Polaroids in an attic, and the choice would pass to them. I watched my own funeral from 1,000 different angles, saw my mother's grief, my brother's confusion, the questions about how I had simply vanished from my grandmother's house without a trace. The police investigated, search parties combed the area, but they found nothing because there was nothing to find. I had stepped outside of time, become a watcher, joined the faces in the windows. My cousin Lisa stood at the edge of the grave, and I could see in her expression that she had already found the photos, already understood what had happened. She would wait, process, investigate, just as I had, and eventually she would face the same choice, though the names would be different, the stakes personal to her in ways they hadn't been to me. I wanted to warn her, to prepare her, but that wasn't how it worked. Each person who inherited the camera had to make their choice freely, without coercion or undue influence. The balance depended on genuine sacrifice, real choice, authentic willingness to step outside of time for the sake of others. So I watched and waited, and maintained my vigil from the darkened windows of existence. I became a face in photographs that shouldn't exist, a figure in the background of impossible images, a guardian of the boundaries between what is and what isn't. And despite everything, despite the loss and the sacrifice and the strange nature of my new existence, I found a kind of peace in it, because I had saved 3 lives, prevented 3 disappearances, kept 3 families whole. The price had been my own normal existence, but in exchange I had gained something else, a perspective on reality that few beings ever achieved, a purpose that transcended individual life, a role in maintaining the fundamental structure of existence itself. The camera continued to document us, continued to predict and prevent, and sometimes allow the disappearances necessary to maintain the balance. And we continued to watch from our darkened windows, faces barely visible in old Polaroids, guardians of the spaces between moments, protectors of a reality that never knew how close it came to unraveling. This is my story, told from outside of time, transmitted through dreams and imagination, and the occasional flicker of recognition when someone looks at an old photograph and sees something that shouldn't be there. I am the face in the window, the figure in the darkness, the watcher who chose to watch so others could live. And somewhere, in an attic in a house on Elm Street, a camera waits for the next person to find it, to face the choice, to decide whether to document or intervene, to save or sacrifice, to remain in time or step outside of it. The cycle continues, has always continued, will always continue, as long as there are boundaries to maintain and watchers willing to guard them. If you find such a camera, if you discover photographs that shouldn't exist, if you see faces in windows where no one should be, remember that those faces chose to be there. They sacrificed their normal existence to maintain the balance, to keep reality stable, to prevent the chaos that lurks in the spaces between moments. And if you're offered the choice, if the camera grows warm in your hands and shows you visions of what will be, consider carefully. Because once you step outside of time, once you become a watcher, there's no guarantee you'll ever step back in. But there's also no guarantee you'll want to. We're here, in the windows, in the photographs, in the spaces between what was and what will be. Watching, waiting, maintaining the balance that keeps your world whole. We are the disappeared who never truly left, the missing who were never lost, the faces in the darkness that guard the light. And we're always recruiting. The night shift. I've worked a lot of different jobs in my life, but nothing quite prepared me for the night shift at the Riverside Extended Care Facility. I took the position out of desperation really, having been laid off from my previous job at a marketing firm when they decided to downsize. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady work, and I figured how hard could it be to walk the halls of a nursing home at night, checking on sleeping residents and making sure everything was secure. My first indication that something was off came during my interview with Mrs. Henderson, the facility director. She was a stern woman in her 60s with steel-grey hair pulled back in a bun so tight it seemed to stretch her face. When I mentioned I was applying for the night shift position, her expression shifted slightly, a mixture of relief and something else I couldn't quite identify. She asked me strange questions like whether I was a heavy sleeper, if I had any history of sleepwalking, and oddly enough, if I believed in the supernatural. I laughed off that last question, assuring her I was a rational person who didn't believe in ghosts or any of that nonsense. She nodded slowly, made a note on her clipboard, and told me I could start the following Monday. The day shift supervisor would train me for 3 days, and then I'd be on my own from 11 at night to 7 in the morning. She emphasized that last part, on my own, as if warning me about something without actually saying it. The training was straightforward enough. The facility had 48 residents, most in various stages of dementia or Alzheimer's. My job was to do rounds every 2 hours, checking that all residents were in their rooms and safe, administering scheduled medications, responding to call buttons, and maintaining the security of the building. The day shift supervisor, a cheerful woman named Patricia, showed me the ropes with enthusiasm, but I noticed she kept checking her watch as evening approached, becoming increasingly anxious to leave before dark. On my last day of training, Patricia pulled me aside and gave me what she called unofficial advice. She told me to always carry a flashlight, even though the halls were well lit. She said to never open any doors that were supposed to be locked, no matter what I heard on the other side, and most importantly, she said to never, ever go to the basement after midnight. When I asked why, she just shook her head and said some things were better left unexplained. My first solo night shift was on a Thursday in October. I arrived at 10:45 p.m., giving myself time to get settled before Patricia left. She practically ran out the door at 11 o'clock, wishing me luck with a nervous laugh. I found myself alone in the nurses' station, surrounded by monitors showing various hallways and common areas. The building was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional beep from medical equipment. The first few hours were uneventful. I did my midnight rounds, checking on each resident. Most were sleeping peacefully, though a few were awake, staring at nothing in particular. Mrs. Chan in room 203 was sitting up in bed, having a full conversation with someone who wasn't there, but Patricia had warned me this was normal for her. Mr. Peterson in room 118 was standing at his window, looking out at the parking lot, which was also apparently his nightly routine. It was during my 2 a.m. rounds that I first noticed something strange. I was walking down the east wing when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting to see a resident who had wandered out of their room, but the hallway was empty. The footsteps stopped as soon as I turned around. I stood there for a moment, listening, but heard nothing except the buzz of the lights and my own breathing. I continued my rounds, but the feeling of being followed persisted. Every time I stopped, the footsteps stopped. Every time I walked, they resumed, always staying just far enough behind that I couldn't see who or what was making them. I tried varying my pace, stopping suddenly, even doubling back, but I never caught sight of anyone. By the time I returned to the nurses' station, I was genuinely unnerved. I checked all the monitors, looking for any sign of movement in the halls, but they showed nothing unusual. All the residents were in their rooms, all the doors were secured, everything appeared normal. I tried to convince myself I had been imagining things, that it was just the echo of my own footsteps or the building settling. The next few nights followed a similar pattern. Quiet early hours, then around 2 a.m., things would get strange. The footsteps continued, but new phenomena joined them. Doors that I had checked and confirmed were locked would be standing open when I passed by again. Call buttons would go off in rooms whose occupants were deep asleep, or, more disturbing, in rooms that were currently empty. It was on my 5th night that I met Mr. Garrett, or rather, what was left of him. I was responding to a call button from room 335 when I found him sitting up in bed, fully alert despite his advanced dementia. He grabbed my wrist with surprising strength and pulled me close, his eyes wide with fear or urgency. "They're walking again," he whispered, his breath cold against my ear. "The ones who didn't make it through. They walk at night, looking for the way out." I tried to calm him, assuming he was having an episode, but he wouldn't let go of my wrist. "You can see them, can't you?" he continued. "Not everyone can. Patricia couldn't. That's why she lasted so long on nights. But you can. I can tell. They know you can see them." I managed to extract myself from his grip and gave him his scheduled medication, hoping it would calm him down. But his words stuck with me as I continued my rounds. The ones who didn't make it through. What did that mean? And what did he mean by saying I could see them? The answer came during my 4 a.m. rounds. I was checking the West Wing when I saw her, an elderly woman in a hospital gown walking slowly down the hall ahead of me. I called out, asking if she needed help, but she didn't stop or turn around. She just kept walking. Her bare feet made no sound against the linoleum floor, and though the overhead lights were bright, her form seemed dim, like she was walking through a veil I couldn't see. I quickened my pace, calling out again, "Ma'am, are you all right? Let me help you back to your room." Still no response. As I rounded the corner she had just taken, I froze. The hallway was empty. No open doors. No sound. Just that same cold, humming quiet. I stood there for a long moment, listening, half hoping I'd hear the shuffle of her steps, half praying I wouldn't. But the hall remained silent. I backtracked, checked every room in that wing, verified every patient, but they were all accounted for. Every one of them, except room 317. Room 317 had been empty since my first night. Patricia had told me the last resident passed away months ago, and they hadn't had a new admission yet. The door had always been locked, but now it was open. Not wide, just enough to notice, just enough to make me stop breathing. I stepped forward cautiously, pushing it open with the tip of my shoe. The room was cold, far colder than the others, and the light inside flickered softly. There was no one there. The bed was made, everything neat and untouched, except for one thing. On the bedside table sat a single, wilted rose, and beneath it a name tag, Margaret Ellis, room 317. I didn't recognize the name, but something about it tugged at the edge of memory, as though I'd heard it whispered in the dark. I closed the door, this time locking it with the key from my belt. I returned to the nurse's station, my skin crawling and my pulse racing. The monitors were normal, the call lights silent, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing behind me. I turned quickly. Nothing. Just the dim hallway stretching out behind me. I sat in the nurse's chair, clutching my flashlight, watching the monitors like my life depended on it. I didn't move until the sky outside turned from black to grey, and the first signs of morning seeped through the windows. Patricia arrived a little before 7. She looked me over and frowned. "Rough night." I nodded. "I saw someone," I said. "An old woman in a gown. She was walking down the West Wing. She vanished. And room 317, it was open." Patricia paled. 317, she whispered. That room should be sealed. We don't have a key for it anymore. I showed her the key I'd used. This one worked. She stared at it, her mouth slightly open. That's impossible. That key was removed months ago, after Margaret died. The name hit me like a punch. Margaret Ellis? I asked. She nodded slowly. Yeah, she was one of our longest residents. Had severe dementia. Always talked about walking through walls and meeting shadows. One night, she wandered down to the basement. We didn't find her until morning. She'd passed away down there, alone. Why was the room locked after that? I asked. Because strange things started happening. Lights going out. Patients screaming at night. Staff quitting. After we sealed it, things calmed down. Her eyes searched mine. But if it opened again, maybe she's not done. I didn't know what to say. I felt cold all over. The room suddenly seemed darker, like the lights weren't quite reaching the corners. I thought about Mr. Garrett's words. They walk at night, looking for the way out. They know you can see them. I went home that morning and tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure. Margaret, drifting just ahead of me, silent and slow. Her back to me, her face always just out of sight. When I returned that night, I brought a journal. I started writing everything down. The footsteps, the cold spots, the whispers I sometimes thought I heard in the vents, and the dreams. Oh God, the dreams. Because after that night, I started dreaming of the basement. Not just vague images, but detailed, vivid dreams. I could see every pipe, every flickering bulb, the dripping water from somewhere deep in the walls. I would walk down there, even though I didn't want to. I would hear someone calling my name. And then I'd wake up, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, the name Margaret echoing in my mind. One night, about 2 weeks in, I finally broke. The call light in room 317 lit up. I stared at the monitor, not blinking. It stayed lit. 5 minutes. 10. I knew no one was assigned there. I knew no one should be there. But I grabbed my flashlight and key anyway. I walked down the silent hallway, the sound of my own footsteps like gunshots in the stillness. When I reached the door, the light above it was on. I pushed it open slowly. The rose was gone, but the bed was turned down, as though someone had been waiting for me. And there, sitting on the edge of the mattress, was Margaret. Her eyes met mine, not cloudy or confused, but piercing, aware. She smiled faintly, then lifted a shaking hand and pointed to the floor. "You have to go down," she said. "They're waiting for you. You've seen them. You have to finish it." I backed out of the room, closed the door, locked it again, and returned to the station. I filed a report. I wrote everything down. Then I made a decision. Tonight, I'm going to the basement. After midnight. I don't know what I'll find there, but I think I've been chosen. Not because I'm brave, not because I'm strong, but because I can see. And I need to know what's been walking these halls, and what it wants from me. The radio operator. 2 years ago, I started working as a radio operator for an emergency dispatch center in a small mountain town called Cedar Falls. The job seemed perfect for someone like me who preferred quiet, solitary work over dealing with crowds of people. Our dispatch center operated 24 hours a day, handling emergency calls for the entire county, which covered a vast area of wilderness, rural farms, and scattered communities connected by winding mountain roads. The building itself was modest, a single-story brick structure built in the 1980s and tucked away behind the main police station. Inside, the dispatch center consisted of a large room filled with radio equipment, computer terminals, and multiple monitors displaying maps of the county with various emergency vehicles marked as small blinking dots. During the day shift, there were usually 4 or 5 operators working simultaneously, but at night, the staffing dropped to just 2 people, and on weekends, sometimes only 1 operator covered the entire county. My supervisor, Robert Chen, was a calm, methodical man in his 40s who had been working dispatch for nearly 2 decades. During my training period, he taught me the intricate details of coordinating emergency responses across such a large and geographically challenging area. The county included several small towns, dozens of rural communities, miles of hiking trails, and vast stretches of national forest where cell phone coverage was spotty at best. The most important thing to remember, Robert told me during one of our training sessions, is that out here, we might be the only lifeline between someone and disaster. When people call us, they're often scared, confused, or in genuine danger. Our job is to stay calm, get accurate information, and coordinate the appropriate response as quickly as possible. He showed me detailed maps of the area, pointing out locations where emergency responses had been particularly challenging. This region has some unique difficulties, he explained, tracing his finger along the mountain roads. Weather can change rapidly, especially during winter. Roads can become impassable within hours. Some of these rural properties are so remote that even our GPS systems have trouble pinpointing exact locations. And then there are the areas where radio communication becomes unreliable due to the terrain. Robert paused, looking at the bank of radio equipment that dominated one wall of the dispatch center. "There's something else you should be aware of," he said, his tone becoming more serious. "Over the years, we've occasionally received some unusual transmissions. Sometimes people playing pranks with CB radios, sometimes atmospheric interference that can make voices sound strange or distorted. Very rarely, we get calls that don't quite make sense, or requests for help from locations that don't seem to exist on our maps." I asked him what he meant by that, and Robert seemed to consider his words carefully before responding. "Look, this job can be stressful, especially during the night shifts when you're alone and handling multiple emergencies. Sometimes your mind can play tricks on you, make you hear things that aren't really there, or interpret routine transmissions as something more sinister than they actually are. The key is to stay focused on verifiable information and not let your imagination run away with you." During my first month on the job, I worked primarily day shifts alongside experienced operators, gradually learning the rhythms and routines of emergency dispatch work. The calls varied widely in urgency and complexity. Some days brought multiple car accidents on the winding mountain roads, medical emergencies at remote farmhouses, or search and rescue operations for lost hikers. Other days were relatively quiet, with only routine check-ins from patrol units and occasional non-emergency calls from concerned citizens. As I became more comfortable with the work, I was assigned to evening and night shifts, which tended to be less busy but required handling larger areas with fewer resources. The night shift typically began at 11 p.m. and ended at 7 a.m., covering the hours when most people were asleep, but when certain types of emergencies were more likely to occur. Domestic disturbances, break-ins, medical emergencies involving elderly residents who lived alone, and accidents involving drivers who might have been drinking. My first solo night shift was on a Thursday in late October, when the days were getting shorter and the mountain air was turning crisp with the approach of winter. Robert had left detailed notes about ongoing situations, patrol schedules, and contact information for all the emergency services throughout the county. The dispatch center felt much larger and quieter, with only me occupying the space that during the day buzzed with multiple conversations and constant radio chatter. The evening started routinely enough. I handled a few calls about suspicious vehicles, coordinated a response to a minor fender bender on Highway 9, and maintained regular check-ins with the patrol units working the night shift. Around 1:30 in the morning, things had settled down considerably, with most of the county's emergency personnel either patrolling their assigned areas or stationed at their respective bases waiting for calls. It was during this quiet period that I received my first unusual transmission. The call came through on our emergency frequency, but the voice was faint and filled with static, making it difficult to understand clearly. At first, I thought it might be someone calling from a remote location with poor radio reception, which was not uncommon in our mountainous terrain. "Dispatch, this is requesting immediate assistance," the voice said, though the beginning of the transmission was garbled. "We have a situation at coordinates." The static increased, making it impossible to make out the specific location information. I followed standard protocol, requesting that the caller repeat their message and provide clearer location details. "This is Cedar Falls Dispatch. Please repeat your location and the nature of your emergency," I transmitted back, adjusting the radio settings to try to improve the signal clarity. There was a long pause, filled only with the soft hiss of static, before the voice returned. This time it sounded clearer, though still distant and somehow strained. "Dispatch, we need help at the old Miller property. There's been an accident, and we can't reach anyone by phone. Please send medical assistance immediately." I checked our county maps and databases for the Miller property, but couldn't find any current listings under that name. There were several abandoned or foreclosed properties throughout the county, and it was possible that someone was referring to a location by an outdated name that wasn't in our current system. I asked for more specific directions or landmark references that might help me pinpoint the location. "The Miller property is about 15 miles north of Cedar Falls, just past the old bridge over Copper Creek," the voice responded. "There's a dirt road that branches off from Route 34, marked by a rusted mailbox. We're in the main house, and we need medical assistance for someone who's been seriously injured." I consulted the detailed topographical maps that covered areas outside the main town boundaries. There was indeed an old bridge over Copper Creek along Route 34, and several dirt roads branching off into rural properties in that area. Without a specific address, it would be challenging for emergency responders to locate the exact property, especially in the dark, but it wasn't impossible. Following protocol, I contacted the nearest patrol unit and the county medical emergency team, providing them with the location information I had received. Officer Martinez, who was patrolling that sector of the county, responded that he would head toward the area and try to locate the property. The medical team indicated they would stand by until the exact location could be confirmed. I tried to re-establish contact with the original caller to get more specific directions and details about the nature of the medical emergency, but my attempts to reach them were unsuccessful. This wasn't unusual, as radio communication in remote areas could be intermittent, especially during certain weather conditions or times of day when atmospheric interference was more common. About 20 minutes later, Officer Martinez radioed back with an update. He had driven to the area north of Cedar Falls, located the bridge over Copper Creek, and found several dirt roads branching off from Route 34. However, he had not been able to locate any occupied residences, and most of the properties in that area appeared to be abandoned or vacant. He had checked several locations marked by old mailboxes, but had not found anyone in need of assistance or any signs of recent activity. I relayed this information to the medical emergency team and asked Officer Martinez to continue searching the area for a reasonable amount of time in case he had missed the correct property. Meanwhile, I continued trying to re-establish radio contact with the original caller, hoping to get better directions or additional information about their situation. For the next hour, Officer Martinez methodically checked every accessible property in the area, using his patrol vehicle spotlight to illuminate buildings and look for signs of occupied residences. The medical team remained on standby, ready to respond as soon as a specific location could be confirmed. However, despite the thorough search, No one could be found who matched the description of the emergency situation reported in the original transmission. Eventually, Officer Martinez concluded his search and returned to his regular patrol duties, noting in his report that the call might have been a false alarm, a prank, or possibly a case of mistaken identity where the caller had provided incorrect location information. The medical team was released from standby status, and I logged the incident as an unresolved emergency call, which was not uncommon in rural dispatch work. The rest of my shift passed without further incident, and when the day shift operators arrived in the morning, I provided them with a detailed summary of the night's activities, including the unusual call about the Miller property. My supervisor, Robert, reviewed the incident report and seemed unsurprised by what had occurred. "This kind of thing happens occasionally," he told me. "Sometimes people get disoriented, especially if they're in unfamiliar areas or dealing with stress from an emergency situation. They might provide incorrect location information or refer to properties by names that are outdated or unofficial. The important thing is that you followed proper protocol and made sure emergency services checked the area thoroughly." Over the following weeks, I settled into the routine of night shift dispatch work, handling the variety of calls and situations that arose during the quiet hours. Most nights were relatively uneventful, with only routine check-ins and occasional minor incidents requiring coordination with emergency services. I began to appreciate the solitary nature of the work and the satisfaction of being able to help people during their times of need. However, about a month after the incident with the Miller property call, I received another unusual transmission that followed a similar pattern. This time, the call came in around 2:15 in the morning on a particularly cold November night when a light snow had been falling throughout the evening. "Cedar Falls Dispatch, this is a request for immediate assistance," the voice said, again sounding distant and filled with static. "We have a serious situation at the Thompson place, and we need emergency services right away." I went through the same process as before, requesting specific location information and details about the nature of the emergency. The caller provided directions to a rural property supposedly located in the eastern part of the county, describing landmarks and road markers that should help emergency responders locate the site. However, when patrol units and medical services responded to the area, they again found no trace of the reported emergency or the property described by the caller. The search was thorough and systematic, covering all accessible roads and properties in the specified region, but no one could be found who required assistance. This second incident followed by a similar pattern to the first, and I began to suspect that someone might be using radio equipment to broadcast false emergency calls, either as a prank or for some other unknown purpose. Radio interference and false transmissions were not unheard of in our area, where the mountainous terrain and atmospheric conditions could sometimes cause unusual radio phenomena. I discussed both incidents with Robert during our next scheduled meeting, and he seemed to take the pattern more seriously than he had the first isolated incident. "2 similar calls in a month is unusual," he admitted. "It's possible someone is playing pranks with emergency frequencies, which is actually a federal crime if that's what's happening. Or it could be some kind of atmospheric interference that's causing old recorded transmissions to be rebroadcast." Robert paused, reviewing the detailed reports I had filed for both incidents. "There's another possibility," he said slowly. "Sometimes, in areas with a lot of history and previous emergency situations, radio equipment can pick up what seem like echoes or remnants of old transmissions. The equipment is so sensitive that it can sometimes detect very faint signals that have been bouncing around the atmosphere or reflecting off geographical features for extended periods." I asked him to explain what he meant by that, and Robert seemed somewhat uncomfortable discussing the topic. "Look, this county has seen its share of tragedies over the decades. Missing persons, accidents in remote locations, situations where emergency services couldn't reach people in time. It's possible that what you're hearing are somehow related to those past incidents, though I can't explain the technical details of how that might work." He looked directly at me with a serious expression. The important thing is that you continue to respond to every call as if it's legitimate, because there's always a chance that it is. We can't afford to ignore a real emergency because we assume it's a false alarm or some kind of technical anomaly. But at the same time, don't let these incidents make you paranoid or interfere with your ability to handle genuine emergencies. I appreciated Robert's balanced approach to the situation, and I resolved to continue following proper protocol while remaining alert to any patterns or additional unusual incidents. The work was important, and I didn't want my concerns about strange radio transmissions to compromise my effectiveness as a dispatcher. The third incident occurred in early December, during my shift on a particularly snowy night when visibility was poor and several roads throughout the county had become difficult to navigate. The weather conditions had already generated multiple legitimate emergency calls, including several minor traffic accidents and requests for assistance from drivers who had slid off icy roads. Around 3:30 in the morning, during a brief lull in weather-related calls, I received another transmission that immediately caught my attention because of its similarity to the previous incidents. The voice was again distant and static-filled, but this time it sounded more urgent and distressed than the previous calls. "Dispatch, please help us," the voice said, and I could hear what sounded like genuine fear in the transmission. "We're trapped at the old Hendricks farm, and something terrible has happened. There are people hurt, and we can't get out because of the snow. Please send help immediately." The mention of the Hendricks farm triggered a memory from my conversations with Robert and other experienced dispatchers. The Hendricks family had been local residents decades ago, and their property had been the site of a tragic incident that had become part of local emergency services history. The family had been trapped during a severe winter storm, and by the time rescue services had been able to reach their remote farmhouse, it had been too late to save them. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold weather outside as I realized the potential connection between this call and the historical tragedy. However, I also knew that there could be logical explanations for someone referring to a property by the name of its previous owners, and that my job was to treat every emergency call seriously regardless of any concerns I might have about its origin. Following established protocol, I requested specific location information and gathered as many details as possible about the reported emergency. The caller provided directions that seemed to match the general area where the historical Hendricks property had been located, describing landmarks and road features that were consistent with that remote section of the county. I coordinated with available patrol units and emergency medical services, though the severe weather conditions made travel difficult and potentially dangerous for responders. Officer Rodriguez, who had the most experience with the remote areas of the county, agreed to attempt to reach the reported location despite the challenging driving conditions. The search that followed was more extensive and difficult than the previous incidents, partly due to the weather and partly due to the truly remote location described by the caller. Officer Rodriguez and a backup unit spent nearly 3 hours carefully navigating snow-covered roads and checking every accessible property in the area, using emergency equipment to ensure their own safety while conducting the search. During this time, I maintained regular radio contact with the search teams and continued attempting to re-establish communication with the original caller. However, as with the previous incidents, I was unable to make further contact with the person who had reported the emergency. The search concluded before dawn with no evidence of the reported emergency situation. The officers had located the area where the Hendricks property had historically been situated, but found only the remains of old building foundations and no signs of current habitation or recent activity. The snow in the area showed no evidence of human presence, and there were no structures that could currently provide shelter for people who might be trapped or injured. When I completed my shift that morning, I felt deeply unsettled by the evening's events in a way that the previous incidents had not affected me. The combination of the historical connection, the severe weather conditions, and the apparent distress in the caller's voice had created an atmosphere that was difficult to dismiss as simply a technical anomaly or prank call. I scheduled a meeting with Robert to discuss the pattern of incidents and my growing concerns about their nature and origin. When we met later that week, I provided him with detailed reports of all 3 incidents, including my research into the historical connection with the Hendricks Farm tragedy. Robert listened carefully to my account and reviewed the documentation I had prepared. His expression grew more serious as we discussed the similarities between the incidents and the potential explanations for what might be occurring. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and seemed to be weighing his words carefully before responding. "What you're describing is more unusual than I initially thought," he admitted. 3 incidents following the same pattern, with historical connections to real tragedies, goes beyond what we typically see from radio interference or prank calls. I think we need to consider the possibility that something more complex is happening here. He paused, appearing to struggle with how to explain his thoughts. Over my 20 years in dispatch work, I've encountered situations that didn't have conventional explanations. In areas like ours, where there's been a lot of tragedy and loss over the decades, sometimes the radio equipment seems to pick up something that shouldn't technically be possible. I know that sounds unscientific, but I've seen enough to know that our understanding of radio phenomena isn't complete. Robert stood up and walked to the window, overlooking the mountain landscape that surrounded our town. The important question is how we handle this situation going forward. We can't ignore emergency calls, even if we suspect they might not be conventional in nature. But we also can't continue sending emergency responders on dangerous searches for situations that may not exist in the way we understand reality. He turned back to face me with a thoughtful expression. "I'm going to contact some colleagues who work dispatch in other mountainous regions and see if they've encountered similar phenomena. In the meantime, I want you to continue responding to these calls professionally, but I'm going to implement a modified protocol that involves additional verification steps before committing full emergency resources." The modified protocol that Robert developed involved attempting to gather more detailed information from unusual callers, cross-referencing location information with historical records, and coordinating with emergency services to ensure responder safety, while still maintaining our obligation to investigate every potential emergency situation. Over the following months, I received several more transmissions that followed the same general pattern as the previous incidents. Each call seemed to relate to historical tragedies or emergency situations that had occurred in our county decades earlier. The voices always sounded distant and filled with static, and the locations mentioned were invariably remote areas where previous emergency responders had been unable to prevent tragic outcomes. What struck me most about these ongoing incidents was the consistency of certain details and the apparent genuine distress conveyed by the callers. These didn't sound like pranks or random radio interference, but rather like actual emergency transmissions from people who desperately needed help but were somehow beyond the reach of conventional rescue services. The psychological impact of handling these calls began to affect my overall approach to dispatch work. Every transmission now carried the weight of uncertainty about whether I was dealing with a current emergency or something connected to past tragedies that couldn't be resolved through normal emergency response procedures. I found myself researching the history of emergency services in our county, learning about incidents and tragedies that had occurred before modern communication and rescue techniques had been developed. Many of these historical events involved people who had been trapped by weather, injured in remote locations, or otherwise isolated from help during times when emergency response capabilities were more limited than they are today. The pattern that emerged from this research was troubling because it seemed to correlate with the content of the unusual transmissions I had been receiving. The calls appeared to be connected to specific historical incidents where emergency services had been unable to provide effective assistance, often due to communication difficulties, weather conditions, or the remote locations involved. During one particularly difficult night shift in late January, I received what would prove to be the most disturbing transmission I had experienced since beginning this job. The call came through around 4 in the morning, during a severe winter storm that had already generated multiple legitimate emergency calls throughout the evening. "Dispatch, this is an emergency," the voice said, and immediately I could tell that this transmission was clearer and more intense than the previous calls. "We're trapped in the cave system near Eagle Ridge, and the water levels are rising rapidly. There are 6 of us down here, and we can't find a way out. Please send rescue teams immediately." The mention of the cave system near Eagle Ridge sent an immediate chill through me, because I knew from my historical research that this was the site of a tragic rescue attempt that had occurred in the 1970s. A group of inexperienced cavers had become trapped during a flash flood, and despite extensive rescue efforts, only 2 of the 6 people had been successfully brought out alive. I followed our modified protocol, requesting detailed location information and attempting to gather as much specific data as possible about the reported emergency. The caller provided information about the cave entrance location and described the underground passages in detail that seemed consistent with the geographical features of the Eagle Ridge cave system. However, as I coordinated with emergency services, I learned that the cave system had been officially closed to public access for over a decade due to safety concerns related to flood risks and unstable geological conditions. Physical barriers had been installed at all known entrance points, and regular inspections were conducted to ensure that unauthorized access was prevented. Despite these facts, I couldn't ignore the possibility that someone might have found a way to access the caves illegally, or that there might be unknown entrance points that weren't covered by the official closure. The desperation in the caller's voice seemed genuine, and the specific details about rising water levels and multiple trapped individuals required a serious emergency response. The rescue operation that followed was the most complex and dangerous of any situation connected to these unusual transmissions. Cave rescue specialists were called in from neighboring counties, and emergency teams spent nearly 12 hours conducting a thorough search of the entire Eagle Ridge cave system, including areas that had been sealed off for public safety. The search teams used advanced equipment to check for signs of human presence, air quality that might indicate breathing activity, and any evidence of recent access to the cave system. They also used specialized communication equipment designed to detect radio transmissions or other signals that might be coming from within the underground passages. Despite the extensive and dangerous search operation, no evidence was found of current human presence in the cave system. The physical barriers at all known entrance points remained intact, and there were no signs of recent disturbance or unauthorized access. The water levels in the caves were normal for the season, with no indication of the flash flooding described by the caller. The failure to locate any trace of the reported emergency, combined with the dangerous conditions that the search teams had faced, led to serious discussions about how to handle future incidents of this type. The cost and risk involved in full-scale emergency responses to calls that consistently turned out to have no physical basis was becoming unsustainable. Robert and I met with County Emergency Services coordinators to develop new protocols for handling the unusual transmissions while maintaining our responsibility to respond to genuine emergencies. The solution involved establishing a specialized verification process that would allow for rapid initial assessment of unusual calls before committing full emergency resources. However, even as we worked to develop more practical procedures, I continued to be haunted by the nature of these transmissions and their apparent connection to historical tragedies. The voices I heard seemed to carry genuine terror and desperation, and the specific details they provided about emergency situations were often accurate in ways that would be difficult to explain if the calls were simply pranks or technical anomalies. The emotional toll of handling these calls, combined with the uncertainty about their true nature, began to affect my sleep and general well-being. I found myself constantly wondering about the people whose voices I heard, whether they represented some form of unresolved trauma from past tragedies, and what it meant that our modern emergency communication systems seemed to be picking up these apparent echoes from previous decades. My last night working as a dispatcher came in early February, during a shift that started quietly, but ended with an experience that convinced me I needed to find different employment. The evening had been relatively calm, with only routine calls and check-ins from patrol units working throughout the county. Around midnight, I received a transmission that was different from all the previous incidents in terms of clarity and immediacy. The voice came through without static or distortion, sounding as clear as if the caller were in the same room with me. Cedar Falls Dispatch, this is Officer Michael Torres, badge number 247, the voice said in a calm, professional tone. I'm requesting immediate backup at mile marker 15 on Highway 8. I have a vehicle stopped for suspicious activity, and the situation is escalating rapidly. Please send additional units immediately. I recognized the name and badge number from our personnel records. Officer Michael Torres had been a county patrol officer in the late 1980s, but he had been killed in the line of duty during a routine traffic stop that had turned violent. His death had become part of local law enforcement history, and his name was displayed on a memorial wall in the main police station. The realization of who the caller claimed to be sent a shock through my entire system that was unlike anything I had experienced during the previous incidents. This wasn't just a historical reference or a connection to past tragedy. This was a direct claim to be someone who had died decades before I was even born. Despite my shock, my training took over, and I followed dispatch protocol by attempting to verify the officer's status and location. Officer Torres, please confirm your current location and situation, I transmitted, trying to keep my voice steady despite the surreal nature of the communication. I'm at mile marker 15 on Highway 8, about 5 miles south of the Cedar Falls city limits, came the immediate response. I have a red pickup truck stopped. License plate number Charlie Delta 7492. The driver is acting aggressively and appears to be under the influence. I need backup units here immediately. I checked our current patrol assignments and confirmed that we had units in that area who could respond to the location. However, before dispatching backup, I also checked our personnel records to verify the details about Officer Torres and the circumstances of his death. According to official records, Officer Michael Torres had been killed during a traffic stop at mile marker 15 on Highway 8 in November of 1989. The driver of the vehicle he had stopped, driving a red pickup truck, had shot Officer Torres before fleeing the scene. The case had eventually been solved, with the perpetrator arrested and convicted, but Officer Torres had died at the scene. The exact match between the current transmission and the historical details of Officer Torres's death created a situation that went beyond anything I felt equipped to handle through normal dispatch procedures. I was faced with a call that claimed to be from a deceased police officer, describing a situation that had already occurred decades ago, but speaking as if it were happening in real time. I made the decision to contact my supervisor immediately, despite the late hour, and explain the situation. Robert arrived at the dispatch center within 30 minutes, and together we listened as the transmissions from Officer Torres continued periodically throughout the night. The communications maintained their professional tone and provided ongoing updates about the traffic stop situation, requesting backup and describing the escalating confrontation with the driver of the red pickup truck. However, when patrol units were sent to mile marker 15, they found the highway empty with no signs of any vehicles or police activity. Robert and I remained at the dispatch center until the end of my shift, monitoring the situation and discussing the implications of what we were experiencing. The transmissions from Officer Torres eventually faded away as dawn approached, but not before providing a complete account of the traffic stop that had led to his death 30 years earlier. "This is beyond anything I've encountered before," Robert told me as we reviewed the night's events. "I think we're dealing with something that goes beyond conventional radio phenomena, or even the historical echoes we've been discussing. This seems to be some kind of direct communication with past events, though I have no idea how that's technically possible." He paused, looking at the bank of radio equipment with a troubled expression. "The question is whether this represents some kind of unresolved trauma that's somehow being transmitted through our communication systems, or if there's a completely different explanation that we're not equipped to understand." I realized that night that I was not emotionally prepared to continue working in an environment where I might regularly encounter communications from people who had died decades ago. The experience had been profoundly unsettling in a way that went beyond simple fear or confusion, touching on fundamental questions about the nature of reality and death that I wasn't ready to confront on a regular basis. 2 weeks later, I submitted my resignation from the dispatch center and found employment in a different field that didn't involve emergency communications or radio equipment. Robert accepted my decision with understanding, acknowledging that the unusual phenomena we had been experiencing would be difficult for anyone to handle on an ongoing basis. In the months since leaving that job, I've often wondered about the nature of those transmissions and what they might represent. Were they somehow genuine communications from people who had died in tragic circumstances, reaching across decades to request help that could no longer be provided? Or were they some kind of unexplained radio phenomenon that created the illusion of supernatural communication? I may never know the true explanation for what I experienced during those months as a dispatcher, but the memory of those voices calling for help continues to haunt me. Somewhere in the mountains around Cedar Falls, there may still be a radio operator sitting alone during the night shift, listening to those same desperate transmissions and wondering whether the voices they hear represent people who are still, in some way, waiting for rescue that will never come.